Now, a chance to hear from Polly Billington. Polly's the CEO of UK100 and can always be relied on to give us some really insightful, challenging insights into where we've been and where we can go from here. So, Polly, across to you.
Thanks very much, Philip. I'm really delighted to be at this launch today because it's been really helpful for UK100 to be part of the shaping of this platform for all of the reasons that Patrick and Rob in particular before me have pointed out. Next slide, please. Just a little bit about UK100. We're a network of locally elected leaders who've committed to delivering net zero. So we, with our 98 of us, 98 local leaders, mostly in England, but including representatives in Wales and Scotland too. So one of the questions you may want to ask if you're not an elected councillor is my boss in that, and we can help you a little bit with that. We'll soon have 100, and they represent all tiers of local authorities from district councils up to combined authorities. Next slide, please. They've committed to going further and faster than the national government. That's no disrespect to the 2050 legal target, but it's a recognition that we need to be more ambitious. Otherwise, because there's always laggards, so the more ambitious need to go further and faster. And we think if we do that, then we can engage with government to change the rules that are required to see more happen. I've got a few case studies here, which some of you will be familiar with, some of our leading members. Of what they're doing, but this stuff stays innovative and unique unless and until the rules are changed so that more of this can happen elsewhere. These things are often happening in isolation. Many of you will know the nature of local politics is that it stays very local. So making sure that the decision makers listen to each other is one of the key parts of our network. You can see some of the leading examples here in terms of what they're managing to achieve. We've got Oxford and their energy super hub, which I think Rob mentioned, as well as their Project Leo. Nottingham's already pretty well known in the energy world as a leader on all of this. 4,000 council houses fitted with solar panels, 21% of its energy demand covered by renewables, 60 commercial scale solar PV, and Cornwall has defined itself as an energy island and is now generating 40% of electricity demand locally, as well as investing locally as well in smart grid wind turbine and piloting responsive technology. Next slide, please. But the important thing is that we bring those local authority leaders together to share that knowledge, collaborate and amplify their collective voice to enable net zero delivery. We know this is a lot about the capability and competence which we think that the Net Zero Go program platform will be able to offer, but it's also understanding fully your powers currently, making sure that those supporting measures are put in place so that those powers can be used more effectively, and developing further relationships. Please, next slide, please. We've got a range of research on this, but the most useful ones in this context is our research on power shift, which I just mentioned just before in the chat. Most comprehensive analysis of the powers that local authorities have already got relating to climate action, of which obviously net zero energy is a significant part. And also we've done a briefing on energy networks and why they're important and what we need to do to be able to make them better. It looks at the relationship between energy networks and connecting our homes, workplaces, commercial and industrial buildings to sources of energy, and how we need to be able to change the rules in order for that to be more effective. Next slide, please. Now, we've got some specific things that we think need to happen, particularly when it comes to local energy, which we think once you've started to use Net Zero Go, you'll find increasingly the limits of what is possible because of what needs to change. So a national framework for local area energy planning, this is very similar to what Rob was talking about, powers and regulation to coordinate the delivery of net zero heat zones, powers to require buildings to connect to district heating schemes, override the constraints on onshore wind. I was delighted to hear there was a conversation about that in Cabinet this morning on the radio. Not so delighted to hear that there's still people in Cabinet who think this is a bad idea. Massive support from people, as long as they see some local community benefit. And power to refuse consent for, I don't know, a new coal mine in Cumbria. That kind of thing really needs to be given. Those powers need to are required. Next slide, please. And then the supporting measures, because a lot of what we're talking about here with Net Zero Go will provide some of this, but there will be more required. Funding and resources for local area energy planning. We're talking to Ofgem about how distribution network operators need to work with them. Changing the policies within the national planning policy framework so that every area is covered by a net zero local area energy plan. Going back to our point about this not just being about cities. Infrastructure funding, because quite often a lot of the infrastructure won't necessarily provide revenue stream immediately, but will eventually. And nobody likes having their road dug up more than once when it could be that hole in the road could be filled with pipes for future infrastructure. That's something that sounds really basic. It's exactly the kind of thing that ends up being a headache for local authorities, and we can change that. Staff resource, obviously we know staff resource and training and energy systems. We know that there's a limit to that in local authorities. We think the net zero hubs are a really important part of that infrastructure, but we're also looking to see what kind of competence is required locally. And make sure that your councillors know about this. It's really hard. They're doing stuff in their evenings and at their weekends. They're not experts. And they've declared climate emergency. They need to be able to know what they're doing on this. Next slide, please. And fundamentally, it's about relationships. I would say this. I spent a lot of time in communications and in campaigning, and you can have all the rules in place, you can have all the money in place, and unless people are talking to each other, it won't work. So we think there's two key bits in this. Obviously, there is a local net zero forum, which was announced in the local net zero strategy. We want that to be a positive feedback loop to creating an understanding about how the barriers are working, how the powers are working, and how the barriers are reducing those powers, and therefore what needs to change. Making sure that the net zero hubs and the UK Infrastructure Bank work alongside this Net Zero Go platform to create the supporting mechanisms that are required for local net zero energy. Next slide, please. And we just think there should be strategic energy bodies or similar mechanisms which should be established with responsibilities and resources to address market failure in energy systems. This ask was drafted absolutely with our members. So the idea that this is just a bunch of policy wonks coming up with something that won't work in reality is not the case. We've been working really closely with our members to come up with things that we think that would be really helpful to national government to be able to achieve net zero eventually. Next slide, please. So for us, we think that Net Zero Go is a really good place to be able to start giving people the information that they need to be able to do more of this. But we also need to make sure that we're creating the confidence amongst the elected leaders to be able to do more, which is why we will be convening our annual summit in July, which will be assessing the progress both nationally and locally to that net zero and how much those powers are being used, which will include those progress reports, and a new updated edition of Power Shift in December 2022 to be able to see whether any of those powers and competencies have changed as a result of national government and legislation, and indeed how people are using those powers more effectively in the country. So I'm delighted to be at this launch. I hope that's useful. I'm very happy to answer questions.
Polly, that was fantastic. Thank you so much. And I mean, yeah, a really compelling vision about some of the practical changes that could be made shortly to help enable the outcomes that we're all seeking here.